Hey, so I think I finally got it working. I don't know how well the audio is going to come through. It's pretty windy out, so I'll just try to talk through it. But what I kind of wanted to do was talk through my telescope. I know I've been posting a lot of pictures recently, and I had quite a lot of updates that I've done since getting back from overseas. So I guess first of all, I'll talk about is the new telescope that I got. So the actual tube here is my main telescope that I use now on a regular basis. It's what's called an astrograph, and what that means is it's basically designed to take pictures. Um, it's a reflector type telescope, so if I take you around here, I can show you inside. The very back, might be hard to see, the very back there is a big mirror. It's about 208 millimeters, just about 8 inches. Um, that's the main mirror that actually collects the light and then tries to focus it back forward. So it reflects the light from the back here, where the mirror is, back up to the front. And then if you look back over here again, I can show you, this holds what's called the secondary mirror. It might be kind of hard to see, but there's a second mirror in there that's at roughly a 45-degree angle offset from that main mirror in the back. And that's designed to reflect the light downward. So if I were using the telescope to look through, I would rotate it around, and then basically the light path that comes into the front comes all the way back, hits the mirror, gets focused towards the secondary mirror, and then gets bounced off that 45-degree angle to come down the tube here. And this is normally where your eyepiece would sit. So if I were using this to visually look through, I'd have to rotate this whole thing forward so you could like look forward into the scope. But because it's an astrograph, I take out the eyepiece and instead I put my camera here. So the light path comes down, hits the secondary mirror, and then gets focused down through here. Now, what I have in the middle here, which you can't really see because it's inside, is called a Coma Corrector. So if you have a bent light path, the edges of the image will end up having the stars looking kind of stretched out, and it's kind of hard to explain, but you can see it really obviously. So there's a little piece of glass here inside. It's a lens that focuses that light towards the edges and then back towards the sensor down here for the camera. And that makes it so you have a really what's called a flat field all the way around the image. And this telescope and the Coma Corrector, as it's called, are both made by Explore Scientific, which I think I can show. Yeah, Explore Scientific, and they've been great. They've sent me some extra parts free of charge to help me solve some spacing issues I had, and it's been a really great experience using this telescope that I actually bought secondhand from someone else here on Facebook. So that's the main telescope. Another new upgrade, you can see right here, this little red box right here, that's actually a motor, and so that motor controls the focus tube. So I've taken off one of the handles here, so you can see there's one adjustment here. Normally you would rotate that, and that would allow you to bring the tube in and out to help you achieve focus essentially. Now what I've done is I've taken off the knob on one side over here, and I've put this motor here. Now I've used motorized focusers in the past, but they weren't called stepper motors, which means they can measure very specific steps along the way as it turns. So it makes it very precise and easy to go back to the same position. In the past, I just used regular DC current motors that didn't really know where they were. So they would just spin, and I would have to set it by like timing. So I'd say, oh, it spun for half a second, so I think it went this far. And it wasn't very accurate. It was not repeatable. I couldn't really do any autofocus routines. I had to still do it manually. I would just control the motor manually. This is completely different. So it knows where it is. Every time it rotates that servo motor a little bit, it can actually measure that, and then it can return to that same position as it goes. So basically for an autofocus routine, I can have it be out of focus on one side, sweep all the way through to the other side, and it measures a graph all the way, and it forms this V shape. And basically where that V peaks out, either the bottom or the top, that means it's at the perfect focus point, and it can purposely move to that exact point to have accurate focus. So that's been a pretty big game changer, and that's why I've had some pretty good luck with focus recently. Let's see. So I did do a post earlier about cable management. I had it looking a lot cleaner than this, but I realized as I was running multiple cables through, some of them were not shielded. So like this power cable right here is a very thin cable behind it, so there's no shielding, and it was running right next to the main data cable that would run from the camera to the capture computer, and that was causing a lot of noise issues. So I'm not currently using this. I'm running a secondary cable that has more shielding, and I'm going to try to figure out a different plan for that. So I have some stray wires kind of hanging around. Next big upgrade, this red box right here. See if I can get to a different angle. So this red box right here has replaced the main computer that I would use. I previously was using this really cheap Chinese like knockoff like desktop computer that was really small form factor, fanless, didn't have any fans that spun, so I liked it because it didn't cause any vibrations. But it was really cheap. It couldn't really handle a whole lot. The RAM was low, processor was absolutely terrible, and then ultimately, how long? Like 6 months ago, it just completely crapped out and stopped working. No, it was more than that, but completely just stopped working entirely. So when I got back from the deployment, I decided to upgrade the computer, and that has been also a big change. So between the telescope, the focus motor, and this computer has really increased the quality of the images and what I'm able to do, and shortened down my setup times, so I can maximize the amount of time I can actually spend collecting photons. Now what's really cool about this computer is it's specifically designed for astrophotography, everything about it. So it's an all-in-one package. It has mounting points up top, so you can see a bunch of screw holes, and mounting parts down below, so you can connect all your normal like fittings that you need to be able to attach it. So it just sits right up here on top of the telescope, and everything feeds into it. So I have all my data connections. What's also really cool, because it's for astrophotography, it has all these different outputs. These 4 outputs here, and then 3 more over on this side for these little connectors here. And that's basically so that you can run one power cable to the computer, and it will power distribute to other devices. So my camera here not only needs a USB cable to actually push the data, it also has a power cable that runs the cooler, and that's how I'm able to chill the camera down to negative 20 degrees Celsius, which is the usual temperature that I decide to image at. Ordinarily, and previously, I would have to run multiple power cables from the ground up to the different components that need power. So like that's the camera, that's the computer, the mount itself needs power. At some point I need to get dew strips, which are basically just little heating elements that you wrap around where your primary objectives are, or if you have a refractor, you'd have the main lens up here. And basically you would just want to warm that optic. So as it gets cold outside and the dew point fluctuates, you can get dew and essentially ultimately ice forming on your optics, and of course that really messes with your image. But all of those can be powered through these connections back here. So I have one power input, I have one power output that goes to the mount, and another power output that goes to the camera, the cooler, and then ultimately I'll be able to plug in the other dew heater elements right here, and everything's controlled completely on the computer. So as you can see, it doesn't have a monitor or anything, it's just the computer itself, but it does have Wi-Fi connectivity. So I use this to connect to my home network, and then I basically remote desktop into this computer from inside the house. So once I have everything set up and aligned, and I want to start imaging, it's really easy to connect to it from inside my house, and then I can stay nice and warm inside, and I can control everything from this as though I had a keyboard, mouse, and monitor hooked up to it. It's pretty awesome. The software on it is excellent. It lets you control. I can turn on and off USB ports from inside. I can turn on and off different power levels or power connectors as I see fit, and it's really been absolutely fantastic. That, and it's significantly more powerful than the other computer I was using. I think it has 8 gigabytes of RAM by stock, but you can open it up and you can add additionals as you need. I think it has one more connection for RAM, so I'm probably going to double it to 16 gigabytes here pretty soon. It came with, I want to say it came with like around a 250 gigabyte hard drive initially, and unfortunately I kind of messed up, and these screw holes for mounting stuff, I mismeasured one of the bolts that went through, and I went too deep, and I messed up the hard drive that came with it. Luckily I had backed everything up into a local file on my other computer, so I just went and bought a new solid state drive, re-imaged it with the previous image that came with the original SSD, and then I was up and running just fine. But that was kind of a heartbreaking moment, because I had not gotten a chance to use it yet when I first actually broke the component. So yep, we have a firehouse right over there. So that's really it for improvements that I've done. As you can see, like I said, I only run one power cable, so I have this extension cord that I have on a nice handy little reel here is the only cable that I have to run out to this entire setup, and that's really just to come through, and it runs up through here and it powers the main computer. Now what I will show you is, speaking of my cable management, so I have that one cable that runs up, and that's the power cable, and it runs up, and then through here I have this sleeve, and in the sleeve is that main power cable that I run out here, and then it also has a cable that loops back and actually connects into the mount to power the mount, And then here's the USB cable that allows the computer to talk to the mount and control its movements. So all of those are running through a single umbilical. And I have this all measured out and spaced out so that no matter how the telescope turns or slews and looks around, it will always be able to have enough slack to not pull on these cables, make any misalignments with how the mount's moving, and won't like pull a cable out or anything, for instance, and so I can keep connection. So that's been pretty cool. I was talking about how the computer has mounting points on top. So when I broke that hard drive, I was screwing in this dovetail plate, and this dovetail plate is what connects to these mounting rings and adjustment rings for holding my guide scope. So I don't know if you've seen any of my other videos or anything else I've talked about with how the scope works, but the main big tube here is for actually using the camera, and that's what I collect the images with. And so the way this mount works is I align it using these different adjustment knobs. I align it to the North Star, which is right about there when it gets dark. So that aligns to the North Star, and as you know, like throughout the night, the North Star just stays visually pretty stationary in the sky, and then everything else rotates around that North Celestial Pole, or the North Star. So the reason why I align my mount to that is so that it only has to rotate technically in one axis to be able to rotate with the Earth. So basically, the whole telescope, well, let me move over here. The whole telescope will rotate to match the rotation of the Earth as it goes, which is about 15, I think it's 15 degrees every hour, give or take. And it can do that on its own. It knows how fast the Earth rotates, and it can rotate to match that as best it can, but it can't be perfect. Especially the more zoomed in you are with the telescope, the more you're going to notice how if it's off a little bit, those stars are going to slowly streak across your image. Because if I'm doing a 5-10 minute long exposure and that star moves a little bit, well, the way the sensor works is it's collecting light that whole time, so you'll see a streak of the star across the sky. So that's where this second little baby scope on top, it's a little 60mm guide scope from Orion, also has a camera on it, and this connects into the main computer as well. And basically what this does, using some software that's called PhD2, Push Here Dummy 2, I think is what PhD stands for. It'll pick out a single star or multiple stars and track as they move. It'll adjust how much the mount rotates to match how much it saw that star move. And what that basically just completely minimizes the amount of trailing that you have from the mount not being necessarily aligned properly. And what's cool about that too is it allows you to make adjustments not just in the rotation in the right ascension axis, but also in the declination axis. So that's the scope fitting this way, and then right ascension is the scope rotating. So between those two axes, the only two axes it has to adjust, it can essentially make sure that you have a very stable image for long exposures. So I've talked about the mount before, but this is a mount that I got secondhand. So secondhand equipment, the mount secondhand, I got it when I first got here to Colorado. And then the scope I got within the last, I don't know, 6 months or so. I bought it before I got home, and the gentleman was nice enough to hold on to the scope for me and not sell it to someone else. So I bought it and then got home, and then he shipped it out to me. But yeah, so this is really what I've been using most recently to get my images. It's worked out really well. Oh, one thing I haven't showed you yet. So on the mount, on the control computer called the Primaluce, what is it, Eagle 4S, it comes with this GPS antenna. And that's so that if I take this mount anywhere else, like away from home, and I want to set it up and do it in like a remote site and run everything, it's really easy for the computer and therefore the mount and everything to know where they are on the Earth. And that's how you help with alignment and tracking and everything. It's a lot of stuff that you need to know, like where you are on the planet. And this antenna makes it really easy. However, I think a flaw of this computer is that this antenna is usually mounted right here. It doesn't have this cable. The antenna is directly on the computer here. Well, USB 3 actually runs at frequencies that can interrupt GPS signals, and it's very frustrating, and I troubleshot over many nights to figure out why the hell I couldn't connect. And it turns out that because many of the devices, like my camera here, and this camera here usually run off of USB, and those USB ports are here and on the other side. So if those cables run near where the antenna was, they're just providing a whole lot of electromagnetic interference, and it stops you from being able to get an actual GPS lock. So I just could not figure it out. Did a bunch of research online, found out about the USB 3 thing, and then bought this cable to kind of move the antenna over here off of a 3D printed bracket that I have, and so now it's far enough away from my USB 3 components that it doesn't cause any problems, and I've so far been able to have perfectly fine GPS connection without any interference. I guess one more thing I can talk about real quick that I can't really show you. Inside here, in front of what I was talking about, that Coma Corrector that does the optical adjustment, on the end of that I have a filter on there, and that's also helped a lot. So Colorado Springs is straight this way. So there's a lot of light pollution that comes from over here. We have a little, I guess, store town center that's like a lot closer to us. It's over here. And then generally speaking, I have some like neighborhood lights that come from this general area and light up the sky. It's pretty dark straight overhead, but I do have some of those other light pollution emitters that are nearby that do cause some interference. In terms of, like, you do a long exposure and there's a bright light that comes by, it's gonna accentuate, and when you're stacking all these images on top of each other for long durations, and ultimately make it really hard to see faint objects. So the filter that I have on here, it's inside there, is designed specifically to cut out some of the glow from the moon, which is also another huge contributor to light pollution. Tonight should be dark, shouldn't have to worry about the moon tonight, but between the moon and the other city light pollution sources, that light pollution filter kind of cuts out portions of that band that get in the way that aren't necessarily the portions of light that you want to collect on from objects up in space, but they do basically blind out your sensor if you're not careful. So that filter has helped out a lot, and I have a few different filters that can kind of cut different aspects of light. So if I'm having specific light pollution problems, I can swap out that filter and hopefully get an isolated nice image that I can collect at the end. I think that's about it. Let's see, I don't think I have anything else to talk about, but yeah, that's my current setup. It's been working out really well for me. I think I've gotten some of the best images that I've done at all, period, have come from the last couple months. And it really is because the upgraded equipment has really basically just solved a lot of my problems. So I was trying to go on the budget for a long time. That's why I was using the DC motor as opposed to a stepper motor, because it was significantly cheaper. I was jerry-rigging a lot of stuff with 3D printed stuff, which I'm still doing, but some of the components you really just can't compensate for. So upgrading those three main components, the focuser, the telescope, and the control computer, have really solved a lot of problems and made it so that I can basically get this whole thing set up in a very short period of time. This is also the same general location where I'm planning on putting the observatory if I can get HOA approval. So currently I leave the mount out here and I cover it with basically a barbecue cover. So the mount, the tripod, I take off the counterweights, and then that stays out here. I take the telescope, which has everything attached, which is also one of the reasons why this is nice. I can take the telescope off, unhook the cables, and this whole package moves together. So the camera, the focuser, the Coma Corrector, the telescope, the control computer, and the guide camera all move simultaneously. And because the tube itself, I don't know if you can see, the tube itself is carbon fiber, this whole setup is lighter than my previous 8-inch telescope with just the scope, without anything else mounted on it. So it's pretty easy to just unhook it, take off the dovetail, lift up the whole assembly, and I just carry it inside to my house. And I come back out here, take off the weights, roll up the power cable, which is on a nice little spool to roll it up towards the house. And then I put the barbecue cover over this, and it just stays here. And that's mainly because it's the winter, and we've turned off our sprinkler system because we don't want anything to freeze and blow out our sprinklers. So if I do put an observatory here, or if I keep this just basically the mount out here by itself for the foreseeable future, I'm gonna have to go through and turn off certain sprinkler heads so that it doesn't spray my mount and cause a bunch of problems. But yeah, so far it's worked great. It takes me only a matter of minutes to get everything set up, as opposed to basically the hour-long process I used to have to drag everything out. Oh, and the last thing, if I can leave the mount out here and leave it configured how it is and where it was sitting on the ground when I aligned it, ideally I don't have to do the polar alignment every night. The mount doesn't move, it's been adjusted, I lock and tighten everything down so it holds the previous alignment. I can just take the scope on or off, and then when I turn the computer on and connect, it's really easy to say, hey, use the last alignment. I can skip that whole process and go straight to imaging right away. So it's worked out pretty well. Yeah, in terms of the amount of sky that I have here, I do have some trees low on the horizon, but generally speaking, I mean, you don't want to image near the horizon anyway because you're looking through more atmosphere. You get a lot of distortion and things can't focus correctly. So the sweet spot really is as things rise over here and move up. When they're directly overhead is the absolute perfect time to image because you're looking through the least amount of atmosphere. You should have the least amount of shimmering possible from the atmosphere getting in the way, and then I can image basically all the way across the sky to this side over here, which is where I start having trees again. But yeah, generally speaking, I don't think these are going to be a problem. And if I do end up putting an observatory in this spot, everything's going to be raised up several feet from where it is. So the higher that the actual setup is, the lower relatively these trees, for instance, are going to be. I might have to get rid of this tree. I don't really want this tree. And it's the closest invader to the sky space. So, but yeah, that's about it. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll try to answer them in the comments section. I was trying to bring up the comments while I was live streaming, but definitely having issues with getting everything to play nice with my camera and my phone. So, yeah, let me know if you have any problems. And thanks for stopping by. And hopefully tonight will stay clear. I'm planning on imaging. I'm supposed to be writing a paper that I have due at the end of the weekend, but maybe I'll just do both. Maybe I'll set the telescope to image and start working on the paper, or I'll just push it off to tomorrow. But yeah, thanks again, and talk to you later.